What if the most painful thing you could do to a narcissist isn't hurting them at all? What if you simply stopped giving them the one thing they came for, access to you? Because when you stop feeding the cycle, four things happen, and the fourth one is the one that changes your entire life. And if you're recognizing yourself in this, pause for a second. Ask yourself, which one am I still struggling to do? Stop explaining, stop reacting, stop seeking closure, or start rebuilding. Put that number in the comments. Because sometimes identifying the pattern is the first step toward breaking it. The first thing you need to understand is that you do not have to explain yourself to someone who is committed to misunderstanding you. When you're dealing with narcissistic behavior, over-explaining can become a trap. You may believe that if you just find the right words, give enough details, provide enough evidence, or explain your intentions one more time, the other person will finally understand. But sometimes, understanding was never the goal. You say, "That hurt me," and suddenly you're defending why you were hurt. You say, "I can't do that," and suddenly you're explaining your entire schedule, your feelings, and your reasons. You make a simple decision, and somehow you're standing there trying to prove that you're not selfish, cruel, ungrateful, or difficult. This is where you need to pause. You are allowed to say no without presenting a courtroom argument. You are allowed to disagree without convincing someone to respect your opinion. You are allowed to leave a conversation when it becomes disrespectful. Your boundary does not become more legitimate because you explained it for 20 minutes. The more you over-explain, the more material you may give someone to challenge, twist, criticize, or use to pull you back into the argument. One explanation becomes another explanation and another until you are emotionally exhausted and the original issue has disappeared completely. Try something different. Say, "That doesn't work for me," then stop. Say, "I disagree," then stop. Say, "I'm not discussing this further," then follow through. This isn't about being rude. It isn't about punishing anyone. It's about recognizing that your peace doesn't require another person's agreement. You don't have to prove your reality to someone determined to debate it. Sometimes the strongest sentence you can say is only a few words. And sometimes after you've said what needed to be said, the healthiest thing you can do is simply stop explaining. The second thing you need to understand is the power of emotional neutrality. When someone is constantly trying to provoke you, your reaction can become the reward. They criticize you and you defend yourself. They make an accusation and you rush to prove them wrong. They give you the silent treatment and you panic and try to repair the connection. Before you know it, your entire emotional state is being controlled by what they say or do. This is why learning not to react immediately can be so powerful. Emotional neutrality doesn't mean becoming heartless. It doesn't mean pretending that you don't care. And it certainly doesn't mean suppressing your emotions. It means learning to decide when, where, and how you respond instead of allowing someone else's behavior to control your nervous system. Imagine someone sends you a message designed to make you angry. Your first instinct might be to write a long response. You want to correct every accusation, defend every decision, and make them understand your side. But before you respond, pause. Ask yourself, does this actually require a response? Sometimes the answer is no. You can say, "Okay." You can say, "I understand that's how you see it." You can say, "I'm not going to argue about this." And sometimes you can say nothing at all. The goal isn't to punish the other person with silence. The goal is to stop allowing every provocation to dictate your behavior. When you become emotionally regulated, manipulation becomes much harder to sustain. You don't rush to defend yourself. You don't chase after someone who withdraws affection. You don't turn every accusation into a courtroom battle. You start choosing your responses instead of automatically reacting. And that changes everything. Because the moment you realize that you don't have to attend every argument, answer every accusation, or prove yourself every time someone questions you, you begin taking your power back. Not by controlling them, by finally learning to control what you give your attention to. The third thing you need to understand is that closure doesn't always come from the person who hurt you. In fact, sometimes the person you're waiting to hear from is the very person who keeps you trapped in the cycle. You may find yourself thinking, "If they would just admit what they did, I could finally move on." You imagine the perfect conversation. They finally acknowledge the lies. They finally understand how deeply they hurt you. They finally apologize without excuses. They finally tell you that you were right, and then you believe you will be free. But what happens when that conversation never comes? What happens when they deny everything? What happens when they rewrite the story? What happens when your pain becomes another argument? You explain what happened, they tell you that you're too sensitive. You describe what they did, and suddenly you're the one being accused of causing the problem. You can spend years waiting for a person to validate an experience they may never acknowledge. That is why you have to separate closure from their cooperation. Closure can begin with you saying, I know what I experienced, I know how it affected me, and I don't need this person to agree with my reality before I am allowed to move forward. That doesn't mean you ignore what happened. It doesn't mean you pretend everything was okay. It means you stop giving another person the authority to decide when your healing is allowed to begin. Sometimes closure is not an apology. Sometimes closure is a boundary. Sometimes it is distance. Sometimes it is deleting the conversation you keep rereading. Sometimes it is accepting that you may never receive the explanation you wanted. And that acceptance can be incredibly painful at first, but it can also be liberating. Because when you stop chasing an apology, you stop chasing the person. When you stop demanding that they understand, you stop arguing with them. And when you stop waiting for them to give you permission to move forward, something changes inside you. You realize that your healing does not require their participation. The final chapter of your story does not have to be written by the person who caused the damage. You can close the door yourself, and you can walk away without waiting for them to hand you the key. The fourth and most powerful shift is this: build a life that no longer revolves around them. When you've spent a long time dealing with someone who constantly demands your attention, your world can slowly become organized around their moods, reactions, expectations, and approval. You start asking yourself what will make them angry, what will keep the peace, what they might say, and how they will respond. Without realizing it, they become the center of your decision-making. Taking your life back means moving that center. You start making decisions because they are right for you, not because they will produce a particular reaction from someone else. You reconnect with people you may have pushed away, you return to hobbies you stopped enjoying, you create routines that make you feel stable. You set goals that have nothing to do with proving anything to anyone. And most importantly, you stop performing your healing for the person who hurt you. You don't need to post something online hoping they will see how happy you are. You don't need to make them jealous. You don't need to demonstrate that you're doing better. Because if your entire recovery is still designed around getting a reaction from them, they are still occupying the center of your life. Real freedom looks different. You wake up and don't immediately check your phone to see what they said. You make plans without wondering whether they will approve. You experience a good day without thinking about whether they know you're having one. You begin to notice that your thoughts are returning to your own future instead of constantly analyzing their behavior. And eventually, something happens that you may not expect. They become less important. Not because you destroyed them, not because you defeated them, but because you stopped organizing your life around them. That is the deeper meaning behind torturing the narcissist. It isn't revenge. It is removing yourself from the emotional economy of the relationship. Your attention becomes yours again. Your time becomes yours again. Your choices become yours again. And your future stops being a reaction to somebody else's behavior. The ultimate victory isn't making them suffer. It's reaching a point where their reaction doesn't matter anymore. That's when you know you've truly taken your life back. One of the most difficult things to learn is that not every manipulation deserves a response. When someone has learned that they can get your attention by creating drama, provoking guilt, demanding reassurance, or suddenly withdrawing affection, your instinct may be to fix the situation immediately. You want to explain. You want to reassure them. You want to make the conflict disappear. You want things to feel normal again. But every time you rush in to restore peace, you may unintentionally reinforce the pattern. If someone learns that an accusation gets them a 10-minute explanation, they may keep making accusations. If withdrawing affection makes you chase them, they may keep withdrawing. If creating a crisis guarantees your immediate attention, the crisis can become a powerful way to control the relationship. This doesn't mean every difficult behavior is automatically narcissistic or intentional. People can behave badly for many reasons. The important question is whether you are repeatedly being pulled into a pattern that leaves you exhausted, anxious, and responsible for managing someone else's emotions. Instead of automatically fixing everything, pause. Ask yourself, is this actually my responsibility? You can care about someone without becoming responsible for regulating their emotions. You can listen without surrendering your boundaries. You can respond without immediately giving them everything they demand. And sometimes you can simply say, I understand that you're upset, but I'm not going to continue this conversation while we're speaking disrespectfully. Then follow through. The power isn't in making the other person suffer. The power is in refusing to make manipulation profitable. When drama no longer guarantees unlimited access to your attention, the pattern begins to lose its grip on you. You stop rewarding chaos with immediate reassurance. You stop treating every accusation like an emergency. You stop believing that another person's emotional reaction automatically creates an obligation for you. And slowly, you learn something incredibly important. You are allowed to care without chasing. You are allowed to listen without surrendering. And you are allowed to walk away from a dynamic that repeatedly demands more from you than it gives back. The sixth thing you need to understand is that you don't have to participate in every manipulation just because someone knows exactly how to trigger your emotions. One of the strongest changes you can make is to stop rewarding manipulation with immediate access to you. If someone knows that guilt will make you apologize, anger will make you defend yourself, or silence will make you chase after them, those behaviors can become part of a predictable cycle. The cycle often looks like this. Something happens, you feel unsettled, they create confusion, you try to repair it, and eventually, you find yourself doing more and more emotional work just to get back to normal. But what if you stopped rushing to restore the peace? What if you allowed the other person to experience the consequences of their own behavior instead of immediately fixing everything for them? That doesn't mean becoming cruel. It means becoming responsible for your own emotions while allowing other adults to be responsible for theirs. If someone is angry because you said no, their anger doesn't automatically mean you did something wrong. If someone is disappointed because you established a boundary, their disappointment doesn't mean the boundary was unfair. If someone threatens to withdraw affection because you won't comply with their demands, you don't have to chase them simply to make the discomfort disappear. You can remain calm and say, "I understand you're upset." And then you can hold your position. This is where manipulation begins to lose its power. Because manipulation depends on predictability. It depends on knowing which button to push and what response will follow. When you stop automatically pressing the emotional reset button for someone else, the pattern changes. You become slower to react. You become more thoughtful about what deserves your attention. You stop apologizing simply to end an argument. You stop accepting responsibility for emotions that aren't yours. And most importantly, you stop confusing peace with compliance. Real peace isn't when everyone gets what they want. Real peace is when you can remain grounded even when someone else is unhappy with your decision. You don't have to control them. You don't have to punish them. You simply have to stop allowing their emotional reactions to control you. That is where your freedom begins. The seventh thing you need to understand is that rebuilding your life is not about proving that you can live without someone. It's about remembering who you were before their behavior became the center of your attention. When you've been caught in a relationship filled with manipulation, criticism, unpredictability, or emotional pressure, your world can become very small. You may stop seeing friends because every interaction creates conflict. You may abandon hobbies because you are constantly exhausted. You may stop pursuing goals because you're spending so much energy trying to keep someone else happy. And slowly, without realizing it, you begin living around another person's emotional weather. If they're happy, you relax. If they're angry, you become anxious. If they approve, you feel worthy. If they withdraw, you question yourself. That is not where your identity belongs. Rebuilding begins with small decisions that belong entirely to you. Call the friend you haven't spoken to in months. Return to the activity that used to make you feel alive. Take yourself somewhere without worrying about whether someone else approves. Create a morning routine. Learn something new. Set a personal goal that has nothing to do with relationships. These things may look ordinary from the outside, but psychologically they can be incredibly important. You're teaching yourself that your life has value beyond managing another person's emotions. And here's something else that matters. Don't rebuild your life just so they can see what they lost. Don't post your happiness hoping they'll become jealous. Don't become successful because you want them to regret hurting you. Because if everything you do is designed to create a reaction in them, they're still living in your head. Build quietly, heal privately, grow because you want to grow. Let your happiness become something that doesn't require an audience. Eventually, you may notice that you are thinking less about what they are doing and more about what you want to do next. That's when the shift becomes real. You stop asking, how will they react? And you start asking, what do I want? That question can change your entire life because your future should not be a response to someone else's behavior. It should be a reflection of your own values, choices, dreams, and freedom. The goal isn't to make them regret losing access to you. The goal is to become so connected to your own life that their access no longer defines your worth. The eighth and final thing you need to understand is that the ultimate victory is not revenge. It is becoming unreachable to the cycle. When someone has had a powerful emotional influence over you, freedom doesn't necessarily happen the moment you walk away. Sometimes the person is physically gone, but mentally they're still taking up space. You replay conversations. You imagine what you should have said. You wonder whether they're thinking about you. You check their social media. You imagine what would happen if they suddenly came back, and without realizing it, you're still responding to them even when they're not there. That's why real freedom is deeper than simply creating distance. It's learning to stop organizing your emotional life around another person's behavior. You don't need to make them jealous. You don't need to expose them. You don't need to convince everyone that you were right. You don't need to watch for their reaction after you leave. And you don't need to prove that you're happier without them. Every time you make a decision primarily to produce a reaction from them, you're still giving them influence. The goal is different. You want to reach a place where you can make choices without mentally checking whether they would approve. You can hear their name without your entire body going into alert mode. You can remember what happened without needing to reopen the argument. You can acknowledge the pain without allowing it to define your future. And perhaps most importantly, you can stop confusing revenge with healing. Revenge keeps your attention pointed backward. Healing turns your attention forward. There may come a day when you realize that you no longer care whether they understand what they lost. You simply know what you gained. You gained your time. You gained your attention. You gained your ability to make decisions without fear. You gained the freedom to build relationships based on mutual respect rather than emotional control. That's the real ending. Not when they suffer, not when they apologize, not when they finally admit that you were right. The real ending is when their behavior no longer determines your behavior. When their approval no longer determines your worth. When their absence no longer determines your happiness. And when you finally understand that you don't have to defeat another person to win. You only have to stop abandoning yourself. That is what freedom looks like. And once you have it, you don't need revenge anymore. So, if you've been wondering how to torture a narcissist, maybe it's time to change the question. Don't ask, how can I hurt them? Ask, how can I stop letting them hurt me? Because the greatest consequence isn't your anger, it's your absence from the chaos. It's the day you stop explaining, the day you stop reacting, the day you stop chasing closure, the day you stop rewarding manipulation, the day you stop living for their approval, and the day you finally build a life that doesn't revolve around their behavior. That's when the cycle starts to break, not because you destroyed them, not because you got revenge, but because you finally understood that your attention, your peace, your energy, and your future belong to you. You don't have to make them jealous. You don't have to make them regret losing you. You don't even have to make them understand what they did. Let them have their version of the story. You have something more important, your life. And when you stop looking backward for validation and start walking forward with self-respect, the person who once had so much power over your emotions becomes just another chapter in a story you're no longer living. So don't become obsessed with defeating the narcissist. Become devoted to rebuilding yourself, because the ultimate victory isn't watching someone else fall. It's realizing you no longer need them to fall for you to rise. And when you reach that place, you won't need to torture anyone. You'll simply be free.